Welcome to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett, where you plus this podcast equals better decisions. I'm Alena Bennett, speaker, author, and leadership expert. I work with chief executive officers and chief financial officers really to help them create universally investable companies where people serve people and the math just works. This week, I'm chatting to the incredible David Fish, but first, here's my thought-provoking question. Now, it's really short this week. The thought-provoking question, or the question that's hit me hardest most, is what's next? And where this really came up, I was having a coaching conversation recently with a C-suite that I work with, and she has come off the back of really busy time. Like, we're talking 2 to 3 years of absolute crazy busyness. And for the first time, she's got a bit of downtime. And she's kind of gone through that period of, I went over and had a holiday and that was fun. And then I got back and I sort of, got over the holiday hangover and that's fun. And now I'm looking around, everyone's busy, everyone's doing something. What's next? And it was really fascinating, the conversation we had. I won't go into the detail, but that what's next question, in the absence of busyness, I think the big message or the big takeaway was when we don't have a million things to do, we don't have to think about it. And so actually, the what's next question for her, in the absence of the distraction of the busyness, was really confronting. But I guess there's another, when I talk about busyness, there's actually another element or another dimension that you can take this what's next question. When you are in the throes of that busyness, that what's next feels a whole lot of pressure. So if we think that the downtime is the what's next question in this space of downtime is a bit confronting, I think the what's next question in the face of busyness is quite stressful because, you're busy. I've got a million things on my to-do list. What's next? What's the most important thing that I could be focused on? And that pressure, what happens if I choose the wrong thing, could be quite stressful. And then I think the other thing that's really come to mind and been a trend over the last few weeks is I'm having lots of people coming up to me having strategy conversations around what's next for me in my career? What does the new year bring? And so I think the sentiment associated with that what's next question is around opportunity. I think there's a little bit of the pressure of make sure I choose the right thing or make sure I optimize the new year. But I think really the feeling associated with that what's next question is, it's a little bit of that dreaming as it's what's the opportunity available to me? What do I really want? So the thought-provoking question for this week, whichever way you choose to interpret it, is what's next. And if you are a journaler, I would fully encourage you or recommend that you open up your journal, you write what's next, ... and see what comes up for you. Can't wait to hear how it goes. And now to our chat with David Fish. Well, hello there. It is wonderful to be back again and to welcome David Fish to the podcast. Welcome, David.
Good morning. Delighted to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. Now, let me just give you a little bit of a wrap here. David Fish is a globally recognised strategist, business leader, and record-breaking pilot. Fishy excels at simplifying complexity, effortlessly revealing and communicating how we can unlock the inherent value within businesses and individuals. As Chief Strategy Officer, he reached the peak of corporate leadership, partnering with some of the world's largest advertisers, global agency networks, and media organisations. This experience provided unparalleled insight into what it takes to truly connect and engage in a world that is moving faster than ever. Today, he helps organisations position themselves for growth and supports leaders in unleashing their full potential, guiding them to own their story, master their narrative, and shape their presence. His mission is clear: to help us all show up on purpose. David, quite a glowing wrap, but even in that, it's just made me think of all of these questions that I could ask you. But perhaps to start us off with a frame, I would ask if you could, through the lens of telling us about your career trajectory, I would love to know, how do you define business success?
I'll go straight to the answer and then I can come back to kind of how I got there, I guess. For me, it's if I link it to leadership, it's about being in service of others and when everything works together. So I think because I wrestle with this, and so I think about this a lot. And there's another podcast I listen to where the question at the end is, what is success? And my build on that is to be in service of others where it's not detrimental to yourself or to others. And so I think sometimes we can give too much to an organization. We can ask too much of people, particularly in the growth world that we operate in, and our demands for more and more and more, the capitalist-driven world. And so I think that balance of to be in service, because the greatest value we bring to the world is when we're in service of others, when we can see our contribution helping other people grow, overcome obstacles, find their best version of themselves. So my journey to get there has been, my career is advertising. My world is how things show up in the world. And that includes brands, companies, but also people. So, I've got 30 years in advertising and 50 years in life. And so the 20 years before the advertising bit was trying to figure out where I fit in the world. And it's continued for 30 years after that. And I've broken myself running businesses where I've got that balance wrong. And I've broken people where I've asked too much of them. So that success question is quite an important one for me, because I think it links to quite a lot of what I'm about and what I believe in for organizations, and particularly leaders today. And not just leaders as in CEOs and business owners, but CFOs and CSOs and CTOs and CIOs and emerging leaders and future leaders.
Yeah.
How do we show up in a world where we are there for people, and people know who we are and what we're about? So we have that deep trust based on, and I'm going to step over this word carefully, authenticity. And I step over the word carefully because I think it's overused. But there is a role for it in how we as individuals show up in the workplace.
Oof. You've just gone to so many different places that I want to go down rabbit holes already. But perhaps maybe you've already been a little bit vulnerable with us in terms of sharing that you've broken yourself and you've broken people. So I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable and say, you know what, my perhaps 15, 20-year-old self, 20 years ago self, would have listened to a lot of the things that you said and be like, Fishy, like that's a load of crap. Like, tell me real worlds. Like, this is not about being on purpose, in service and balance. Like, just cut the crap. And as I said, that was kind of me 20 years ago. I now have also made all the mistakes and know better. But how do you, and perhaps I would imagine you have a particular expertise in this, because language goes such a long way. So how would you, faced with that, which I'm sure you do, how do you kind of bridge from that to everything you said, which I wholeheartedly believe in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a little bit of parent in this, in the sense of when you say to a child, don't touch that, it's hot, and they have to touch it to find out it's hot. There's a little bit of, you have to have a little bit of lived experience to cross that bridge, I think. So you can build the bridge as much as you like and go across to the other side, it's better. But until someone's fallen off the bridge and realizes the bridge is a better way to cross the river, it's hard to get people to cross that bridge, I think. So I tend to work with people, let's call it 35 plus, who've got to that stage where they've experienced a little bit of it's not even burnout. They haven't quite found that fulfillment. They haven't quite, even commercially in their work, they're in a role and they're defined by a role. So there's a lot of work I do around people being defined by title and defined by role. And I was that person, right? So I collected titles, I collected cash. I loved having chief in my title. Still do, because I can make up my title because I work for myself. And there's status attached to that, but the status doesn't validate us. And that's the problem, is that when we chase the status for validation, we miss out on the connection. And through the connection, we see our value, and our value is where we get our true validation from. And so there's a cycle to that. And I think until you've experienced that, or you get to a point where you're like, I've got all the titles, I've got the Porsche, I've got the Rolex, I've got the Tom Ford suit, and I'm still not loving the job I'm in, or I'm still not feeling fulfilled in the work I'm doing. I think there's a tipping point. And I don't know the magic to get a 25-year-old, because I'm the same. At 25, I was like, nah, I'm better than the 50-year-olds. I don't know why they're still hanging around, to be honest. They're a bit boring. And I'm never wearing a suit. And why do they have briefcases? And why do they read those weird paper things? What could possibly be in the Financial Times that's of interest to me? And where do I get the next title from? So I was that person.
Yeah.
So I don't know that there's like the child with the don't touch it because it's hot. I don't know that there's a magic way to get someone to feel pain until they've experienced pain. And with
Yeah.
children, they have to break themselves. They have to crash their bikes into walls and fall off things to learn that those things are where the boundaries are. And I think actually our career and going through life and how we show up is actually similar.
Mm. Come back to this cycle. Would you mind repeating that cycle that you just referred to? That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so the how we find our value in the world, essentially the way we're wired is the first thing we'll do is protect ourselves. So this goes back, we can go back a long way, because this goes back to our tribal days, where exclusion from the tribe, rejection from the tribe basically meant death. If we got excluded from the tribe, we wouldn't survive. The saber-toothed
Mm.
tiger versus this is not great, I lose. And so we learned that we had to be in the tribe to be safe. And so things like exclusion, rejection, and judgment were warning signs that we could be excluded from the tribe. So we're wired to pick those signals up and want to avoid them, like deeply want to avoid them, to get to a place where we feel safe, which is to belong. And so there's a cycle. When we detect a threat, I have three characters that I believe we have in our minds that we deploy. There's the chameleon, I'll fit in. There's the boss, I'll hide behind status to feel valued. The third is our lion king, which is the one that creates these stories that make us look amazing. So super strong, don't show vulnerability, don't show sides of weakness. This is where our incredibly polished LinkedIn profile comes in with words like strategic and accountable and all these fluffy words that are completely meaningless. So these three characters will show up to protect us when there's any sign of risk. And what we have to do is actually step into that risk and feel whether or not it's safe. And what our brain does is go, hey, you know what, there was a little risk there. You showed up, you didn't die, because that's what it's fearing. Let's go again. And so we start to let our guard down a little bit. We start to go, I don't need to fit in quite so much. I could show up a little bit more. I don't need that completely polished story. In fact, when I showed a little bit of who I was by telling a more relatable story, I got a really warm response from that. And so we start to adapt. As we start to adapt, what we do is we build trust. So we start to realize a key part of trust is the brain evaluating very quickly, am I safe here? And if it feels safe, it starts to build trust. Now, there's some dimensions behind that we can go into of how that actually forms. And as we build trust, we start to connect with people. And it's by connecting that we get validation. So when we connect, we feel like we belong through acceptance, through people seeing the value that we bring to them, and through being included. The problem we have right now in the world is that digital is hijacking that. So when we post online and we get a like, it triggers the same chemical release of dopamine in our brain that says someone likes you, you're validated. When we get a follower on LinkedIn, someone values me, they like what I'm posting, I feel good about the world and people want me in their world. But it isn't actually giving us the same validation as a human connection does. And so digital is hijacking that process where we're not actually evolving. We're not building this healthy sense of self. And part of the healthy sense of self is to put ourselves out there and fail. So to find the places where we are at risk and the places where we think we're at risk and we're not. And so that is that cycle. And as we share, connect, we get validation through the connection as opposed to validation through the like, the follow, the share on LinkedIn or on Facebook, on Instagram, or the infinite scroll.
I love that. So status doesn't validate us, connection does.
Correct.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. This is a really live question. I had a coaching conversation with the CFO yesterday, and it was so fascinating because she operates in a really high, fast-paced environment, lots and lots of dollars, lots and lots of regulatory compliance. And, she has this short window, and I'll say short in terms of 4 to 6 weeks of lull, of downtime. And it's probably the first period of downtime she's had in a little while. And she was like, Alena, I just feel really uncomfortable because I see busyness around us and I see that there are people in a meeting room over there and the CEO is calling me less. And, someone asked me for something that they could have asked better questions, but they really just wanted to have this transactional conversation. So I didn't feel very connected. And we sort of, peeled back the onion. And really what it was that loss of connection. Like she wasn't feeling connected. So she felt at threat.
Yeah.
it was really interesting. Without having the benefit of this conversation, I couldn't share that cycle. But we talked about, love languages in the workplace, words of affirmation. We used the terminology validation, and she kind of went, "Oh, this is just a bit confronting right now." If validation happens through connection, and if I had had the benefit of this conversation, what helpful coaching guidance and advice is a bit of an oxymoron in its purest terms. What guidance could I have provided for her to be of more service to her?
Mm. So I think it's seeking out where she's making a contribution and noticing that. So often what happens is we think we miss the moments where we're making a contribution. So we miss the magic moments where we're adding value that we take for granted, that other people can't do, but we think they can. And so noticing where you're adding value, basically, where you're showing up and doing something that someone else can't do, and believing in the value that delivers for somebody else. So there was some beautiful descriptive language in your example there where there was this feeling of being undervalued, and undervalued says threat. Right? So the brain goes, If you're not valued here, the tribe doesn't need you. If the tribe doesn't need you, you won't survive.
Yeah.
And survival in this context is lose your job, but our brain goes to lose job, lose house, end up homeless.
All gone.
It's, we catastrophize within seconds through that process.
Mm.
And so breaking that cycle and noticing, actually, when I produce that report, no one else can do that. And people literally froth over that report and come to me and ask me for that. And so when people ask us for things, that they seek out our expertise. Underneath that, what we default to is experience. So job titles, lists of roles we've had, and the functional things we do. That's base level. That's functional. What our value comes from is expertise. And so which is the things we do that other people can't do, and the things that are actually transferable. So being able to look at a string of data and see insight is a transferable skill regardless of industry. So people think, I've got this job with this title in this industry and I can't go anywhere. But if you come above experience, which is accountancy or regulatory compliance, and you go, what's the expertise within that? What is it that you bring that other people can't do, but they value from you? Two things happen. One, your skills become transferable because you're now selling expertise, not experience, not the past, but the possibility of the future. Mm-hmm. And the second is you start to believe in your own value. And when we believe in our value, we start to notice our value. And as our value shows up in more places, we get validation from that, which is, I am valued here. I have a place here. I belong here. And then we feel safe and we feel secure. And then we open up more, because when we feel safe and secure, we're not worried about standing up at the all hands and telling a story and being vulnerable. Again, another trigger word. Vulnerable. People go, Brene Brown must cry at work. No, that's not true. But we do need to open up. We do need to share stories that make us relatable or are relatable to people around us. But when we're in that threat state of, I'm not valued here, and I could be ejected from the tribe, the last thing we think about is to be vulnerable or to open up or share a story or try and build connections back into that tribe.
Fascinating.
We've gone deep early.
We have gone really deep early, and I'm going, how do we lift it up and a bit more surface? So let's, when I say lift it up, why don't we go, we have to talk about your flying. So why don't we physically go in the air? But actually what I'd be really interested in is, what are the lessons you've learned about showing up in the air and how you show up on the ground? Because, if we talk about vulnerability and risk in the air is very, very physically real. Mm-hmm. And, when we're on the ground in a corporate environment, we are talking about sort of less threatening things like a bad performance review, losing our job, and all the rest of it. So I would love to hear the lessons you've learned in the air and how you see them show up on the ground.
That's a great question. I think one of the main ones is I've done lots of things in aviation that are intense and have high risk attached. And those situations force you to focus. So they force you to remove distraction and actually get down to, if we take an aeroplane, the really critical things that are keeping that plane in the air. So even if the engine stops, you need airspeed, you need to know how high you are, and you need to know where you're going. And as long as you can pick those three things, if you look at a cockpit of an airplane, it's full of instrumentation, buttons and switches. None of that matters if you are not controlling your airspeed. You don't know how high you are and you don't know where you're going. And when I fly aerobatics, two things matter in aerobatics: height and airspeed. So if you're high, you can convert height to airspeed. If you're low, you need speed to be able to convert that to height. So you're trading two dynamics. And you can literally fly aerobatics by just managing those two pieces of information. Now, in business, what we do is we overwhelm ourselves. We sit with dashboards and data lakes, and we have people bringing us reports with 90 slides in them and Excel, and now we're using AI to try and consolidate it. And we're overwhelmed with information. And a lot of the time, we haven't picked the one or two dials that in stress we need to focus on. So they could be business metrics. They could be early indicators that warn us that something is going right or something's going wrong. And also the levers. So what are we trading? If we've got time, but we don't have money, how can we use time to create money? If we've got money, but we don't have time, how do we use money to buy people to create time, for instance? Just getting down to those really basic dynamics and doing it when it's calm, because it's very hard to do it in stress. So studies are a stretch. I find aviation accident reports fascinating, and right the way through to shuttle disasters. And the reason is we spend an awful lot of money investigating aviation accidents, and we spend very little money investigating business crashes. So you go back to GFC 2007, major failure of the global financial markets. And there'll be a few case studies in the Harvard Business Review about it. If we lose a space shuttle, we'll spend $100 billion understanding why it crashed. And we'll spend 5 years with thousands of people poring over everything we possibly can to understand not just the physical failure, but the human factors. And the human factors for aviation disasters are the same as business failures, because we're people. We're people making systems, we're people making decisions, and we're wired to behave in certain ways. And one of those is it's very difficult to be rational under stress. So if we haven't thought about our stress response and therefore our plan as to what we're going to do in stress, we're not going to figure it out when we're in stress. So the time to figure out how an aeroplane flies is not when it's not flying. It's to figure that out. And you learn this thing called primacy, which is get the absolute basics dialed in super early on in your training, so that as your training becomes more advanced and your situations potentially become more difficult to manage, you can go back to primacy under pressure. And one of the challenges is when we change situations. So if I go from flying an aeroplane to a helicopter, the controls are different, and primacy can now become a problem because I've got to unlearn things. And this is where it gets hard to unlearn as we get older and change situations. So that focus, having a backup, as in know where to go under pressure, knowing how to clear things out of the way to get to focus. So what really matters? What are the levers that you can pull, particularly under stress? I would say they are probably kind of like high level. It's things that come from aviation because they have to. Like, these are the things we know will keep us safe, that are harder to get to in business because someone knocking on your door gets your attention, which is similar to an aeroplane window blowing open in flight. But the aeroplane window blowing open in flight won't kill you. The distraction from the aeroplane window in flight will kill you. And someone knocking on your door when you're doing an important task is the same distraction. We just don't equate it to the same level of danger.
So let's talk about that more, because there is so much in that, and quite often I'm more used to having conversations and thinking about the sports analogies and thinking about high performance sports and elite sportsmen and how they show up and train and all the rest of it and how they taper off and all of those things. But this is similar but very, very different, because we are talking about life and death here. Tell me, and as you said, that was kind of the highlights, but everything you described, I see all of the time. How do you, with the companies that you work with, how do you ground them? How do you ground them, and how do you get them to focus on just the two things, not the 200 projects they think they can achieve before the end of the financial year? How do you practically do that with them?
One of them is we play a game around who's flying the plane. So if you go through the tasks that people do in their day jobs, and then the things they do under pressure and the things they do because it helps people out, and you start to get this, you get this stretch across a particular leadership team. Let's take a leadership team, C-suite leadership team. And then we go through an analogy, which is who's flying the plane. So this is based on a semi-true story. Plane takes off, there's a disturbance in business class, and there's a blocked toilet in economy. Cabin crew are overwhelmed. They knock on the cockpit door. The captain comes out to deal with the economy toilet. While dealing with the economy toilet, the co-pilot's flying the aeroplane. On the way back through business class, one of the business class passengers hasn't got a drink. The pilot serves the drink as the aeroplane flies into a mountain. And so this is the analogy that breaks it for people. It's if your job is to manage finances, to deal with strategy, then that is the job only you can do. The job only the pilots can do is fly the plane. They shouldn't be serving drinks and fixing blocked toilets. And the number of times a CEO can get the light bulb moment and go, I've got my hand down the toilet right now trying to get toilet paper out of a U-bend. I'm not thinking about the strategic future of the business. I'm not thinking about the over the horizon, whatever that is, 3, 5 years, 2 months, doesn't matter. Whatever your horizon is.
Yeah.
Getting people into that, literally into the analogy of what's your place in this organization? So what is your role? What is your stretch? And what is your, I'm never going there? Because if I'm not flying the plane, who is? And the answer is nobody.
Yeah.
Because there's nobody else to do that. So in C-suite jobs, in CFOs, CEOs, CSOs, CIOs, CTOs, they have jobs. And they have a very specific role that only that person in that role, and again, this comes back to value. When you know what your role is and what you do, you know your contribution, not just to the team, but to the organization. And therefore you feel valued within that team, and it reduces threat. When everyone thinks everyone can do everyone else's job, it's a great party plane until it flies into the mountain. And then everyone's a little bit this is where you get teams who are kind of like, no one trusts anybody, because everyone thinks, well, you can serve the drinks and I can serve the drinks. And if you serve the drinks better than I serve the drinks, I'm going to get fired because I'm more expensive than you. That creates a low trust environment because everyone's feeling threatened by everybody else. If I know I'm the co-pilot, my job is to support the pilot, help the pilot make critical decisions, and keep distraction away from the pilot, particularly in bad weather and uncertain times. That's what I'm doing. That's my role here, and that's all I'm doing. And so we start to get people literally placed through the organization to go, this is your wheelhouse. This is your strength. And this is the boundary of where you stretch to. And the minute you step outside that, you're serving drinks and the plane's flying into a mountain. And it's an analogy that sticks with people. Once they've figured out how many times a day they're going to the back of the plane and emptying toilets, it helps them start to figure out how that aircraft should work in their situation.
I can imagine. And you also made this statement, you need to figure out how you respond to stress when it's calm. So we know, and you would see this as well, that when it's calm, it's like, oh, let's pile on the projects. Let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. And so suddenly our workload goes from here to here. We are not running scenarios around what could go wrong. We are not testing ourselves or putting ourselves in a situation where we learn about how we respond to stress. What do they need to be doing instead?
That's where a good offsite should come in, as opposed to an offsite where everyone goes offsite to a nice venue, pays a lot of money for the venue, and then presents PowerPoint that they should present in the Monday morning meeting.
Yeah.
And so this is really where the problem comes in terms of how we use offsites. We go offsite to do things we could do in the office, as opposed to going offsite and doing scenario planning and going, okay, this afternoon we're going to do a cyber threat simulation. We're going to war game that we've been hacked.
Right.
And what's our threat response to that going to be? Who's going to call who? How are we going to deal with that? What are we going to do when the market crashes? What are we going to do when there's a tariff imposed? What are we going to do when there's a next COVID and we're completely out of control and somebody else is dictating our business conditions for us? And so they're the conversations and the activities that should be happening in an offsite, not everyone's got 10 slides, you've got 20 minutes, do a business update, everyone asks questions on the business update, now everyone poke cocktail sticks in their eyes and let's go and have a drink. Because that is a complete waste of a leadership team's time to go offsite. If you need to bond, go to a hotel, have some drinks.
That's right.
It's way cheaper than running 2-day offsite where everyone just presents PowerPoint. So it's about creating the space. And people go, oh, we haven't got time. Everyone's got the same amount of time. So some companies have used that time and become unicorns. Apple, Amazon, Meta. The leaders of those companies have the same amount of time as a leader of a company that's not doing well. So what are you putting in that time? If you're taking a leadership team off site for 2 days, what are you putting in? How are you valuing that time and experience to do something that gives you the ability to do that you can't do in the day-to-day?
And what is the biggest resistance that you receive from that?
I think it's actually just not thinking about it in that way. There's kind of a routine of, well, we do our quarterly offsite and everyone does an
Mm.
update. Everyone has, everyone's got to have a bit of time in the sun, share their business. And it's like, no, send the decks around.
And
Send the
then
decks
what do you
around.
do as an extension? Sorry to interrupt.
Mm.
When you say to them, guys, you cannot achieve 100 projects this year. That's ridiculous. You need to get it down to 5.
So again, there's an exercise around valuing projects. So there's effort versus reward, and there's 2 ways you can do it. You can do it post-it notes, which is kind of fun if you've got the time to do it, and there's an
Yeah.
online tool you can do it where people do it anonymously, and we get a ranking out of it. What I find most powerful in however you do it is the visualization on a wall or on a
Mhm.
screen of essentially plotting a bunch of things against 2 axes, and often I'll get them to agree the axes. So it's
Yep.
like business impact versus cost of time for this team to manage. So you go, okay, we've
Mm.
got to put this in to get that out. There's 100 projects, plot them.
Yeah.
And when you see them on a scatter graph across a wall, whether it's big post-it notes or you see them on a screen, suddenly you get this realization of they can't all be as important. Because now suddenly something's come out at the top, which is it's actually low effort but high reward. Well, why are we
Mm.
not talking more about that? If that's the one we can get going soonest, and then we've got one that's really high reward but really high effort, what are we going to do about that? Like, let's have an honest conversation about, do you want to put this effort in? Do you have this
Mm.
effort to put in? Given you do all have, when we walked in, you were all busy. You all had day jobs that were consuming you, and now we're walking out with 100 new projects. So I'm not a fan of action plans. I'm not a fan of the 100 projects. I'm
Yeah.
a fan of 3.
Yeah.
And I'm a fan of milestones, which is, if these are the 3 things we're going to do, where are we going to next? What's
Yes.
the next thing that's going to signal that we're making progress towards that goal,
Mm.
and work towards that? And again, there's psychology behind milestones versus action plans. Action
Mhm.
plans overwhelm us. They actually, a really bad action plan can just cause us to take no action. It literally
Yeah.
just
Wow.
engages us because we're paralyzed by how much we've got to do. And you see it in the lack of accountability after an offsite. People come back, there's an Excel
Yeah.
document put together with all the post-it notes in it. Someone tries to make sense of everything. The first leadership meeting, it gets 20 minutes. The second leadership meeting, it gets 10 minutes. And by the third leadership meeting, no one's talking about it. And so within 3 weeks of an offsite, an action plan has died. And if that's the only outcome of an offsite was to build an action plan, that
Yeah.
offsite was a complete waste of time.
Correct. Wow. Wow. I want to lift the conversation. The practical tips are so helpful, Fishy. So thank you for those, for being so generous sharing those. I want to lift it again. Your most recent book is called Winning Presentations, and we can talk. I want to talk more around how you translate a presentation to business success in a bit, but I want to just sit on the word win for a minute. When I think about contribution, when I think about value, I think about companies typically, they either play to win, or they say they play to win.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them are playing not to lose.
Yes.
And then the really good ones are really playing for purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some play for power. We'll stick them down on the bottom of the spectrum. Tell me what you mean by winning, and if you can help us with the contrast. What does losing mean in your, how you define that in business?
It's a commercial book, so it is converting business. It's there's a frustration behind it, which is the best ideas don't always win, and by win I mean get bought. So we do all this
Mm.
work, we produce this
Oh,
great solution, we've got a great tech product, we go to market with it with an amazing sales team, and someone with an inferior product gets the business, and often that is because of packaging. So the inferior solution was better packaged and wins the business. So in this context, winning is winning the business. It's converting the effort that we've put in to make something into cash that goes onto the bottom line.
mhm.
And in my view, there's too much wastage in that process where we've got businesses producing great products with great people with amazing looking presentations that don't convert. And so there's this, essentially what it does, even if you are a high performing team, it's eroding your performance because you're leaving cash on the table that could be in the balance sheet.
Mm.
And so that's the gap that book is about closing, which is it sits between sales training and presentation training because there's a gap between those two. We invest in people being on stages and being good speakers,
Yeah.
and we invest in sales basics,
Yeah.
discoveries, uncoveries, sales techniques. but we do this great uncovering. We understand the client's world. We're an amazing presenter. And then we don't package what we know into a compelling story that helps that buyer buy our product. And so my work is nearly all B2B now. And in B2B, what we get is indecision. So the buyer is like, I love this. This is great. But the risk of moving the business to you is greater than the risk of staying where I am. And so the indecision stops the purchase. And it's because we haven't packaged the story in a way that increases the value to the point where it overcomes the risk of change. And so the buyer gets stuck and we lose the business. And so ultimately, the bit the bit of commercialism I buy into is that successful companies drive innovation. So when we're making money, and this can be true of a small business and it can be true of an enormous business, when the business is cash rich, so cash flow is good and profitable, it can invest in people and it can invest in innovation and it can take risks. So if you look at the most innovative companies in the world, they are either very well backed by investment because people believe in what they're going to deliver, AI, or they are making very good profit and able to reinvest. Meta, Google, Amazon, Oracle, the list goes on, Apple. They have and our banks. So if you look at probably the best and most innovative app in Australia, it comes from CommBank, which is our largest company. And so when there's money, you can make investments. And so I equate winning to helping companies become better at what they do because they're winning the business that they deserve to win, as opposed to making all this sales noise, but not converting. Because when they convert, they become more profitable. And when they become more profitable, then they can be a more successful business. And I think as consumers and individuals in the world, we benefit enormously from successful businesses that innovate. They are the ones that can be more purpose-led. It's very hard to be purpose-led when you're failing. Like, it could be well-intentioned, but if you go out of business, there is no purpose left. So the commercialism for me is that successful businesses are good. You can put a ... How successful does a business need to be? But that's a follow-on conversation. So I want to help businesses make money from the work that they do, as opposed to leave money on the table.
Love that. I thought I was going to go somewhere, and I'm changing tact.
Okay.
Because you've just created the chicken and egg question in my head. What comes first, money or people? Right? Because you're absolutely right. There is no business without money, because there's no money to sustain the business. When we created this real math of business, it was really simple. Businesses are, how I define the real math of business, is 50% math, 50% people. Creating businesses where people serve people and the maths just works. Now, in our conversations so far with the podcast guests, there seems to be a unanimous agreement that it all boils down to people. But I want to have I want to talk about that relationship, that chicken and egg, because there's no business without money. What's your views on that?
I agree. So in my career, I can name the occasions, both for myself and also with clients I've worked with, where we've hired a person that's been the differentiator. So people are the differentiator at the end of the day. You have, and often it's not one, it's two or three, or a combination, or a team that fires because you've got that hiring right. And sometimes money fuels that. So sometimes money is the thing that allows you to go out and stretch to get that person who's a little bit more expensive, or to pay that relocation allowance that gets that person to travel and join the business or meet their demands or whatever it is. So there is an intrinsic relationship in that piece. But at the end of the day, if you take the people out, then you're left with a brand, a product, but no innovation, no motivation to go and do anything. It's why we don't have, let me see if this is true, we don't have any fully automated businesses that don't have people somewhere. The front end might be automated, the sales and marketing might be automated, the production might be automated, but there's still someone leading the future strategy. If you stop innovating, if you stop having strategic thinking in the business stagnates and dies. And so that human part, I think, is I think it's probably more than 50%, but without the money part, and this is obviously the startup challenge, when you're starting out, how do you get the cash to get to the point where you've got cash flow and you can make the big bets that start to build that team. And I think this is a real challenge for founders, particularly where the founder is smart, capable, driven. How do they build the next layer underneath them that supports that, and they don't feel threatened by that, so that they keep their sort of their own status intact, but they're building that team that enables the business to build its foundational strength that ultimately investors need to see, because investors don't like investing in a single person. They like investing in the structure around the person. And so that early stage is really challenging for that, because you do need cash flow, and you do need investment to be able to make those decisions and take those risks. You don't always get it right as well. As many times as I found that person, I've missed that person or got the wrong person.
Yeah, right. And even at that level, though, you're absolutely spot on in terms of, it really depends on age and stage of a company or a business. But even then, I couldn't help but think, but that's even at the founder level, taking that next step, that's where that packaging that you talked about becomes so important, because a role of a founder and or CEO or whoever is really to sell a business internally to its people and externally to the market. So that packaging becomes really important. When you were talking about packaging, I went back to the word that you kind of used with hesitancy at the beginning of the conversation, which was authenticity.
Yeah.
And I went, hang on, Fishy. Authenticity and packaging to me sound like two sides of a coin, like completely opposite, right? So can we talk about, because I think what happened within me when I went, oh, authenticity and package, was a bit of an internal, external dilemma. And I think that is also the dilemma that you talk about when you're talking about packaging. It's the internally, things might be exceptional, but if no one hears about it, no one sees it, no one can buy it.
Yeah.
I know I said a lot of things then, but I'm hoping, because this is all sits within your area of expertise, you can make something of the words I just said.
So the bridge between authenticity and packaging is substance. And anytime we package without substance, it's going to come undone. So if we create a product, so the fastest way to fail a bad product is to advertise it.
Say that again. The fastest
way to fail a bad product is to advertise it.
Okay.
Because it's still a bad product. It's now just a lot of people know it's a bad product. So if you can create the best advertising in the world, which is the superficial layer on a bad product, but when I get the product, I'm going to realize it's a bad product, and then I'll tell other people it's a bad product, and that product will fail fast. So the substance is the key. If a product doesn't have substance, I can't package it into a presentation that will sell it. And what's often missing is we've lost the substance in the story. So we've created this marketing spin. We've got all the jargon. We've got all the internal language inside the business, all the acronyms that everyone knows really well, all the product features that everyone can rattle off, and none of that connects with the audience. So this is a real challenge in that we go back to founders and startups. The story that sells the business to investors is different to the story that sells the business to customers. So investors buy abstract stories that talk to the largest viable market. They want to know that there's growth. So if we think about urban air mobility, the future of drones flying us to the airport, autonomous vehicles, urban air mobility says big market. Lots of things require urban air mobility. There's lots of cities, urban, there's lots of air. Therefore, this is a big business to put lots of money in. So the leading companies in the US are getting huge amounts of investment. As a consumer, you don't know what that is. So that message of urban air mobility attracts investors. But what we're going to buy as a consumer is an air taxi to the airport, an Uber with wings.
Yeah.
But if I say Uber with wings, it doesn't feel big enough for an investor. It says, oh, you're going to replace the little black parked cars going to the airport. There's not enough of those. That business isn't big enough. And so again, this is part of this substance piece is because customers buy the things they understand and can relate to, but fundamentally what we deliver has to deliver. And so the promise to investors is very different and abstract, and the promise to customers is very concrete, and there's a product at the end of it. And so when we're looking at packaging, one of the things we're doing, so when I package a business, which is positioning, or I package a product into a presentation for a sales team, we're looking for the substance, the origin story of the business. Why did the founder start this? What was the problem that you were genuinely trying to solve? Great founder-led businesses where the founder's still in the business know that they'll know why there was a frustration, there was a rant that got them going. And often they'll step over that. In the jargon to get the investors, in the polish of the business, they'll often be like, oh, it doesn't matter anymore. It's like, absolutely it matters, because that's the hook back to why you started this. Now, in a 100-year-old bank that's been through 23 CEOs, CFOs and boards, that's really hard because you've lost the origin. You've lost the tie back to where this business came from. So then you have to look for other things. When we start to package things like, we'll get into specific brands now, NAB more than money, I go, no, you're not. You're a bank. The only reason I come to you is for money. So what's the more bit? What's that about? I don't understand. So it becomes this strap line. It becomes marketing-led packaging, as opposed to getting into the substance of the business and truly understand. And I can see the strategy document. There's 90 pages that say, no, we help people, we build businesses, we're there for us. I can see all the strategy lines. Don't care. Because as a customer, when I hear that line, I go, I get objection mindset, which is I don't believe it. I don't believe that everything else I see from that business in non-marketing communication, financial reports, updates to the market, is actually about helping customers in a way that's more than money. And so there's an incongruency which says there's no substance there to support. Yeah. And then I get that feeling that you had, which is authenticity and packaging. They feel at odds because in that instance they are. And this is the thing. We feel this. So we're into the emotional side of trust. And the emotional side of trust is a feeling. And when something my simple line for that is we feel fake fast. That's literally how we go through the world. If something because again, it's a threat. If the grass rustles on the left-hand side and our eye catches the grass rustling, we turn to look at it because it might not be the grass rustling, it might be a saber-toothed tiger. And so our instinct is to check things that don't feel right. And so the brain goes, am I safe? What's going on? Pull back, stop, then process that in the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain, and go, oh, no, actually, it's just the grass in the wind. I'm okay. I'm not about to be eaten. And so when I say authentic and packaging, you go, oh, threat. This might not be, this isn't right. I'm pulling back. And you'll sometimes say something with people and you'll see them do this. And that is their threat response going, oh, this isn't right. I'm feeling challenged by this. I need to just take a moment and evaluate this. So you picked it up perfectly. And so the bit that then gets us over that is substance. So when we feel that threat, when we don't feel the link is there, we pull back. And if we can't close and rationalize those two things, then we won't move forward with that conversation.
So now let's take it to at an individual level. Because I know one of the things that you spend a lot of time talking with your organizations about is internal credibility, substance, and how that shapes or influences the external market.
Yeah.
I think that sounds incredibly powerful. How do you do that? How, what's the bridge? Is it more substance? How do I do that?
It's actually about bringing perspective to the external. So I call it, we've got a lot of internal experts. So really smart people, deep expertise. And this is that kind of older end of the employment spectrum, if you like, been in their roles for many years, know a lot of stuff. They're just not known outside the organization. So they're the internal expert with very limited external impact, or they're invisible. There might be an about page on the website that reads like a corporate bio, and their LinkedIn page looks like they've been in the witness protection program for 5 years. Like you literally can't find anything on the internet about them. You're like, do they really exist? And that's not good, right? It's not good for it's actually not good for the business, and it's definitely not good for the individual. So they're the two things we're trying to address: is how does the individual position the business, and how are they positioned as an individual through their presence? And the key is to understand, again, back to expertise and perspective. How can they share a perspective that is of value to people outside the organization? And people go, oh, well, I can't share too much because I'll give away all my trade secrets.
Yeah.
there's a way of sharing expertise without giving away the IP to your secret recipe for Colonel Sanders' crispy chicken. There are things that you can share that are in service of people, perspectives, learnings, stories of how you've got to be where you are, things that you've done along the way that really help people. So there's this, if we look at LinkedIn, the most common posts on LinkedIn are we've hired someone, yay, look at us. We've won an award, yay, look at us. I'm an award judge, yay, look at me. Someone's left, we're sad. We've hired someone, yay, we're happy again. That's the most common group of posts, and no one cares. And so that should be about 10%, not 100%.
Yeah.
And the 90% is made up of us contributing expertise in service of the audience. How do we help the audience through what we know, what we've seen, and what we see coming? And so the process is to understand the expertise of the individual and the areas in which they can be of service to the audience that matters most to them. Then we look at the platforms. So it's not just LinkedIn, there's stages, so keynote speaking, podcasts like this. There's contributing to press and publications online and in print. So there's lots of different avenues people can share their content through and their perspective through, based on who their audience is and what they know. And then we look at messaging strategy. So what are the things that you're most passionate about that you can write or talk to most convincingly, and that you, and if you look at this, I have conviction in these topics because it's my expertise, but I also care about it. And so when we've got expertise that matches up with care, which is conviction in my world, then we show up with presence. And so you can start to channel that through whether it's writing, whether it's video, whether it's podcast stages. Podcasts are a great bridge for people who want to get into keynote speaking because this is live, it's real, but it doesn't have the pressure of walking onto a stage in front of big lights. So it's a good bridge to get to that. But it's really finding that expertise where we can shape perspectives that can go out into the market and then getting people comfortable with building a cadence around that. So there is a system that we get to do that.
So that sounds so fascinating, and I know we could talk for hours on this stuff. I'm already planning our next conversation, Fishy, by the way. But the way you're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, that totally makes sense for the founder. That totally makes sense for the entrepreneur. What I'm hearing you, however, saying this approach could be incredibly powerful for corporates at any size.
100%.
That must be a total paradigm shift for the companies you work with.
Yeah. And in fact, I do a lot with CFOs because CFOs often have great knowledge, but don't think, but they have terrible public presence. Like they're invisible. But what do you do if you're looking to invest in a company? What do you do if you're looking to do business with a company? You look at everybody in the company and you're looking at who are they? What can I find out about them? And what we have right now in this space is what I call static visibility in a dynamic world. Static visibility is the bio on the about page. Often CFOs might not be on there, and certainly the next level down might not be on there. Then we've got LinkedIn. And in the old days, we'd go to Google, and I love the fact we're calling Google old days, but you go to Google, get a link and go to a website. And so you could control that path.
Yeah.
Dynamic is we're using AI, and AI is going, okay, what is there on the internet about you? And so it looks at breadth. How many sources of information are there? Podcasts, articles, the company website, references to things you've written, LinkedIn articles that can be indexed. And then how much depth is there? So have you shared one point of view or lots of points of view? And that's what large language models, so Gen AI is looking for. When all there is the about page and it can't find anything else, well, then the summary it serves up is pretty light. And so if I'm going to AI and going, give me a summary of these 5 executives of this company, and the only person that shows up is the CEO, well, what's my impression of that company? It's power-led, it's ego-led, or it only cares about the person at the front and not the people doing the work. There's a whole bunch of things I can assign which may not and probably aren't true, but just the way that team is showing up on the internet to a large language learning model creates an impression. And that's us not shaping our presence and owning our authority. And so all of those roles, every single day, are becoming more critical because what we don't realize is the number of times people are looking at us and finding out about us that we don't know about. So if I'm walking into a room, I want to know who's in that room. And so I've done something, whether it's searched, and tried to find them on the bio page and they're not there, or whether it's ask chat to build me a profile, I've done something to get a sense of who those people are. And when the little tidbits show up, so I met an Olympian the other day. I was doing an executive roundtable on this topic. There was an Olympian who was a triathlete, and there was another person who was a cyclist. And immediately, because I knew this, I was able to connect the two of them. They didn't know about each other. So this is back to connection. We can open a meeting and connect in a way that fosters a genuine connection and therefore a feeling of inclusion through showing up and being visible online, or we can do small talk. How are you? Busy? Yeah, great. How was the weekend? Oh, yeah, great. And we waste 5 minutes on small talk, which does nothing. And so helping people come into a room and going, you know what? I know a little bit about Alena. I've got a little hook that, we've got an interest in locations. I can see it's not even about schools. I can see we've got an interest here. I can see you've got a background here. I've got some things to hook into that can open this conversation up, as opposed to, particularly if you're an introvert, dreading, I don't want to talk about the weekend. I went caravanning. I don't think I can talk about being a caravanner. What am I going to talk about? I'll make something up. And now I come across as fake.
Wow.
And so you can see how then we start a negative spiral of, that feels a bit weird. This person feels a bit cold. That feels a bit wooden. And this is the Lion King now showing up and putting on a front for us and telling stories that are trying to make us something that we're not. And now we get the person on the other side of the conversation who we're trying to connect with at the start of a meeting. Could be a very important meeting. And they're holding back a little bit, going, this feels a bit weird, and this is a bit awkward. And so that presence that we build, in my view, today in a dynamic world, is more critical than ever.
I can see enormous upside. I can see a lot of personal discomfort, and I can see those characters being challenged. But all I see is upside, particularly as you say with with AI now everywhere. We can be exposed really quickly. You know, when you say if I stuck that in chat and it came back with the CEO only, you came up with your inferences. In my head, I just went risk, right? So both of those things are bad.
That's right.
Fishy, we've covered so much ground, and I got to say, you know, we said at the beginning of this conversation we had no idea where it was going to go, and I love everywhere it's gone. I just want to ask as a closing question. Is there something that you think we've not touched on that is a really important message for our listeners to take away from this conversation?
We have covered it, but I think it's that showing up today, and people go, I show up, I get dressed every morning and turn up at work. Showing up today and being visible and working on who you are, the value you bring to the world, the true substance behind what you do, and making that visible is more critical than ever. And I see too many leaders who think they're visible, but they're really not. And so even just doing that audit and kind of just checking yourself out, doing the old Google, but actually do a chat GPT summary and see what it brings up. And then stepping into that, like being prepared to work on that and recognizing that being hidden isn't safe. And our wired instinct is that it is. And our instincts are 100 million years old. And the world we operate in today is digital. And so this idea of keeping ourselves safe by fitting in and hiding who we are is doing more damage today than it's ever done. And now we've got to figure out whatever that is for each individual, we've got to figure out how to overcome that.
Okay, so I'm going to just add a personal request. Can your next book be called Being Hidden Isn't Safe? And can I have the first copy? Because I got to say, that's like the one key takeaway that's overriding in my head is this fear. And this fear, really, that's about lack of connection. So if you write a book, Being Hidden Isn't Safe, I'm buying it. I'm getting a signed copy from you, and we're going to talk about it again on the next podcast. I'm just putting it out there. Hey, Fishy, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
If people wanted to learn more about you or hear more about how you help companies and individuals, how would they do that? What's the best way to reach you?
So website, davidfish.com.au, and email address is just fish@davidfish.com.au. So
I love it.
Nice and simple.
Love it. Well, thank you so much again. That's been wonderful. I have got pages of notes and also hours of mental synthesis to do. So thank you so much. When you're up my way doing some flying, please check in.
I will.
I'd love to catch up with you again.
It's been an amazing conversation. Thank you.
See you later. Bye. And what a great chat with Fishy that was. This leads us right into our listener question. And remember, if you want to submit a listener question, you can now email us at realmathofbusiness@gmail.com. Or, of course, you can leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify and we'll hopefully get it into a future episode. This week's listener question is from Sam. Thanks, Sam. Your question is, hello, Alena. Thanks for this awesome podcast. Loved watching it. And I don't usually watch podcasts. Nice. My question is about resilience. How do you think about the people and numbers side of business when times are tough versus when they are plentiful? Oof. Thank you, Sam. Such a good question. I guess what I'll first say, maybe just to help anchor it into your head and those that are listening to this as head, is remember what happened in COVID. I reckon COVID was like taking off the Band-Aid and seeing what was underneath. It was really scary for a lot of companies who may have thought they were previously categorized in that plentiful category. So maybe just hold that thought or that time of your life in the back of your mind, because that might bring that to life for you. I was thinking about this, Sam, and it took me down a couple of different rabbit holes. It's obviously easy to think about the times are tough, but let's just quickly talk about the plentiful side for a minute. When things are plentiful in business, life is pretty easy. We can go into cruise control and we throw a lot of compliments around, oh gosh, the business is rock solid. We've got a great product or service out there. And our people, we have the right people in the right roles doing the right thing. So there's a lot of high fives. And we kind of think it must be working. And so the statement or the phrase that might be bandied around, either verbally or non-verbally, is this business is rock solid and we've got the right people. But what can happen is this business is rock solid. It should still be rock solid. So what is going wrong and who is in charge? And so I think when times are tough, we shift very much from the what, the business side of things, the math side of things, to the who. And I think that's because what it does when times are tough, when business is not going like we think, it really exposes us as humans. One of the stories that comes to mind, it's a personal story, is when I moved to the coast 5 years ago now, 6 years ago. I had to engage with new accountants for the business. And of course, when they were onboarding me, they wanted to learn about the business trajectory, and sort of how performance had been going in the past. So historic financial performance, where we were now, and where I expected the business to go. And I've got to say, Sam, it felt like I was stripped bare and I was talking to them naked, and I'm not joking, I'm not over-exaggerating that feeling, because I had to talk to them and put my face and my reputation. I had to talk about what had happened when times were tough. I had to fess up to what I was doing wrong when the numbers didn't work. And that was really exposing. And so I think when times are tough, we need to remember that a business is just a bunch of humans working together for a common cause and hopefully a common good. And so when times are tough, yes, the numbers are not working, but the humans involved in those numbers or producing those numbers, who are making decisions that are translating to the numbers, they are feeling extremely exposed. And so I think it's really important to then acknowledge that actually that the people, the humans in the business, are feeling very exposed. And so it got me, I pulled out, because I'm frothing over Brene Brown's latest book, Strong Ground, at the moment. But it got me pulling out her book, Atlas of the Heart, because you referred to the feeling or the attribute of resilience. And I thought, okay, I'm sure this book can help me. And when I was kind of thinking about, the human side, this human exposure, what's really going on? Now, if you have not read Atlas of the Heart, and what I love about this is a little bit of a coffee table book as well as a leadership guide. It does talk about, I think it's 47 different emotions, but I think broader than that, it talks about the emotions that come up in certain instances, scenarios. So with respect to your question, when times get tough, these scenarios that I think are relevant here are places we go when we compare, right? So when business is tough, it's tough against an expectation. So there is an inherent comparison that goes on when we are talking about business times being tough. Places we go when things don't go as planned. Again, times are tough, mean we thought we were going here. We're not going there, and that feels tough. Places we go when it's beyond us, when we have not met those performance results, when those performance results feel beyond us. Places we go when we're hurting. Yeah, so remember, we're talking about humans that have delivered this performance, that whose decisions have influenced this performance. When we're hurting, places we go when we fall short. I think that's an obvious one. And places we go for when we search for connection, which I think is really interesting given the conversation we've just had with Fishy. So I'm not going to talk about all of the different emotions, but what I thought might be helpful is to break it down by group of people. So when times are tough, who are the people that kind of get on the chopping block or who are having the difficult conversations? And I think really there's 3 different categories of people: the board, the CEO, and the CFO, or the executive. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say the individual emotions within each of those scenarios that exist or that might exist for board members, for CEOs, and for the exec. So I think when times are tough for board members, they might be experiencing comparison, envy, jealousy, resentment. They might be experiencing a sense of comparison to expectations, regret, and confusion. So all of those things, because they sound like big and very emotive attributes, but remember, every board member is simply just a human being who has said, I am going to stake my reputation on this business. We are going to steer it to success. And when times are tough, that becomes a question mark. For the CEO, they might experience the comparison to expectations. They might be experiencing regret, frustration, anguish, hopelessness, despair, because remember, they are accountable to the performance of the business as a whole. They might feel shame, self-compassion, perfectionism, guilt, humiliation, and embarrassment. If you think about times are tough for business, you've got to feel for the CEO who is definitely experiencing all of these emotions. And then finally with the exec, very similar to the CEO, but they also might start to feel challenges with respect to their sense of belonging and insecurity. They might go into that threat state in that fear cycle that Fishy just shared with us. So I think it's really important when we talk about, how do we think about the people and number side when business when times are tough? Yeah, business when times are tough, the numbers aren't working, but it's really about the humans involved and the human emotions, because that influences everything, every conversation, every decision in terms of trying to get them out of those tough times. So I think if I were to summarize all of that, we need to be individually resilient, Sam. So we need to know what our purpose is, how we show up, what the value is that we contribute. We need to have that intellectual humility around where we might have stuffed up, where we may have gone wrong. But we also need to really embrace the concept of anti-fragility as an organisation. Of course, anti-fragility being that concept that Nassim Taleb really popularized with the book of the same name. We refer to that anti-fragile, we use the anti-fragile concept that he coined in our golden triad. So the 3 key relationships that we believe need to be solid, they need to be anti-fragile in order for sustained business success. And that's the CEO, the board, and the CFO. What you really need is that golden triad of relationships to really be in lockstep so that they can go through those emotions together, so that they can get to the other side of getting those numbers up, so that you still maintain and sustain a business where people serve people and the maths just works. I know that was a lot of information, Sam, but I couldn't help but go down that path with Brené Brown, because the work that she does on the feelings related, the feelings that necessitate the attribute of resilience so much. So thank you so much for your question. That's brilliant. Thank you all for listening to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett. If you liked this episode, remember to subscribe for more content and stay on top of the real math of business. I've been Alena Bennett. Thanks so much for listening.